The Zeroth fleet arrived in Earth's orbit with a blinding flash of light, the sheer size of their ships causing ripples in the fabric of space itself. They moved with a cold precision like predators circling their prey. Humanity's defense forces were a mere shadow compared to the might of the alien armada, but they were not intimidated. The fleet of Earth ships stood firm, though outgunned. They had something the Zeroth had never encountered before: a fierce determination and a belief that their survival was worth any sacrifice. As the Zeroth ships glided closer, their massive weapon systems powered up their commanders, confident in their victory. The alien race, known for their dominance over countless worlds, began issuing orders, their voices cold, and assured the humans would be crushed within minutes. They had no idea that Earth was a species born of resourcefulness and unpredictability. At first, the humans fired their first round of shots into space, their weapons, sputtering like a child learning to walk. The beams of energy flew wildly, missing the enormous Zeroth ships by miles. It was a pathetic show of force. The alien fleet's commanders looked on in amusement as the shots barely even registered against their shields. The Zeroth leaders laughed loudly, a booming sound that echoed across their ships. They believed the humans were out of their depth and had no clue how to fight in this galactic arena. One of the commanders, a towering figure named Zuruk, sneered at the small human vessels on his monitor. He turned to his crew and gestured dismissively toward the screen, his voice dripping with condescension. "Is this the best they can do?" he asked with a cruel smile. "We will wipe them from the stars as easily as we crushed the others in our path." Meanwhile, aboard Earth's ships, the crew members were not discouraged. They knew what the aliens saw, and they knew their chances were slim, but they also knew the humans had a secret, a gift they had learned over the years that could turn the tide of battle unpredictably, a mind that could adapt to any situation on the fly. They weren't aiming for the enemy ships at all. The first shots were a test to observe the enemy's reactions. The humans knew that they couldn't hope to defeat the Zeroth in a conventional fight, but they didn't need to aim perfectly. All they needed to do was create chaos and confusion, something that the Zeroth had never prepared for. As the Zeroth continued to laugh and underestimate them, Earth's fleet fired again, and this time something different happened. The lasers from Earth's ships started to strike near massive asteroids in the vicinity of the alien fleet. The rocks began to shift slowly at first, then with increasing velocity, as if moved by an unseen hand. The Zeroth commanders watched in disbelief as the massive asteroids began to shift and move in the direction of their ships. At first, they thought it was a strange coincidence, but as more shots were fired and more rocks were nudged into motion, their amusement began to fade. The asteroids weren't small either. Some of them were enormous, each one capable of causing catastrophic damage if they hit a ship even one of their size. The Zeroth fleet started to move into formation to avoid the rocks, but it wasn't enough. The rocks were coming too fast, and from all directions. Zeruk stood in silence, his hands gripping the command chair tightly, his mind racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. He barked orders to his fleet, his voice harsh and demanding, "Get those rocks out of the way." He shouted, his tone shifting from confident to panicked. But the crew was scrambling. The alien technology that had once seemed infallible was now a liability as their ships tried to dodge debris. They weren't designed to fight against asteroids or any other natural threats. They were meant for war, not for evading the unpredictable twists of space. The humans had done something no one could have predicted. They had used the gravitational forces of nearby space objects to create a web of destruction. Their shots weren't meant to hit anything directly. They were meant to cause disturbances in the surrounding environment, a carefully orchestrated chaos that the Zeroth had never considered possible. Their ships tried to deploy countermeasures, but the asteroids were coming from too many angles. Zeruk growled in frustration as the first asteroid slammed into one of his ships. The impact sent shockwaves through the command deck. As the ship's hull cracked and split open, the alien crew scrambled to stabilize the vessel, but it was too late. The damage was catastrophic. The ship started to drift off course as another asteroid struck its vulnerable side. The Zeroth fleet began to reel as they lost one ship after another in the debris field. Meanwhile, the humans watched as their plan unfolded with eerie precision. The asteroids weren't just disrupting the alien ships, they were slowing them down, diverting them off course, and causing massive confusion within their ranks. The Zerath commanders had underestimated humanity's ability to think creatively. They had laughed at the humans' poor aim. But now they were struggling to survive as the environment itself became the greatest weapon Earth had ever wielded. The human fleet wasn't sitting idle either. They had learned quickly, adapting their movements to avoid the debris, and using the chaos to close in on the alien armada. Earth's ships fired once more, and this time they had one singular target: the heart of the Zerath fleet. The Zerath fleet was in total disarray. The asteroid field had become an unstoppable force. The debris was so dense that it was impossible for their ships to avoid it. One by one, the mighty alien vessels collided with rocks, or were forced to change course to avoid impacts. Some ships were losing shields, others had weapon systems malfunctioning. Entire sections of their fleet were now disabled as they tried to navigate through the chaos. Zerok paced his command deck furiously, trying to regain control, but his once flawless strategies were falling apart. The human fleet watched with cold focus as the Zerath floundered. Their mission was no longer just about survival, it was about winning. But they weren't done yet. They had one more part of the plan to execute. They were ready to strike at the heart of the Zerath fleet. While the aliens were distracted and off balance, Earth's ships began to make their move through the debris field, using the chaos as cover. The smaller human vessels darted in and out of the asteroid clouds, slipping past the disoriented alien forces unnoticed for now. Zerok's voice grew frantic as he ordered his fleet to regroup, but it was too late. The humans had already taken advantage of the confusion they'd created. The alien ships couldn't track them through the storm of rocks that had once been their weapons of war. Now they were simply obstacles that made it harder to fight back. The Zerath commanders began to panic. Some were trying to fire on the humans, but the debris around them made targeting nearly impossible. The once mighty armada was now a sitting duck. The humans had come to understand one thing about their alien foes. In the brief moments of chaos, there was always an opening, a way to strike that the enemy would never expect. While the Zerath were busy trying to recalibrate their shields and countermeasures, Earth's ships moved with deadly precision towards the heart of the fleet. Their targets were not the largest ships, but the smaller, more vulnerable command vessels that controlled the entire armada. Earth's fleet fired in perfect unison, targeting the weak points of the alien ships. The beams of energy were timed just right, striking the most critical systems in the Zerath fleet. The first shot hit the flagship's communications array, sending out a burst of static that spread through the entire armada. Another shot took out the secondary command ship, and with it the coordination between the ships began to unravel. As the Zerath commanders realized what was happening, it was already too late. The humans were closing in for the final blow. Their ships had become ghosts, moving through the wreckage and debris that once had been the alien fleet. With surgical precision, they picked apart the heart of the armada. The command structure was crumbling, and the once overwhelming force was losing its grip on the battle. The Zerath commanders had no idea what to do. Their fleet was now in chaos. Their ships were scattered and struggling to stay in formation. The flagship was losing power, its communication systems fried from the human attack. The once proud alien force was now like a wounded animal, frantically trying to escape the inevitable. The remaining ships tried to regroup, but they were disoriented. They couldn't track the humans through the dense cloud of debris that had been created. The rock field had gone from an obstacle to a full-fledged trap. Zerok stared at his command screen with disbelief. The humans were no longer just firing shots that missed. They were everywhere, darting between asteroids and wreckage like ghosts, slipping through the cracks in the chaos. Each time the Zerath tried to adjust their fire, they were struck again by another unexpected shot from the humans. Each blast hit a critical system and caused the alien ships to falter. More and more ships were lost to the barrage. One by one, the mighty Zerath fleet was being whittled down until there was almost nothing left. The remaining ships had their weapon systems offline, their shields barely functional, and their ability to communicate a complete mess. Zerok knew they were in trouble, But it wasn't just the loss of ships that worried him, it was the fact that the humans weren't even trying to fight the way he expected. They weren't engaging in direct combat. They weren't trying to overpower him with their firepower. They were using something far more dangerous. They were using the environment itself against him. Zarak cursed under his breath as he tried to get a status report from his fleet, but the communications were scrambled. The humans had destroyed all the relay stations, and the remaining ships were too scattered to send a unified signal. His fleet was essentially blind and helpless. It wasn't just the weapons or the ships, it was the way the humans had fought this battle, their unpredictability, their ability to adapt faster than the Zarath had ever expected. Zarak looked at the wreckage of the once formidable Armadan, now barely recognizable. In the debris field, the asteroid impacts had torn through the ships and scattered their remains like broken toys among the stars. His heart sank as he realized the full extent of the disaster. This wasn't a fight that could be won through brute strength. This wasn't a fight that could be turned around by a single victory. They were losing. On the other side of the battlefield, the humans were preparing for the final strike. Their plan had worked better than anyone had hoped. The Zaroth fleet was now a shadow of its former self, and the time had come for Earth's final assault to dismantle the last remnants of their foe's power. The humans had no time to waste. The battle was nearing its climax, and they could feel the momentum shifting in their favor. Earth's ships moved through the debris with eerie precision. They had created chaos. Now they would end it. The remaining Zaroth forces were fractured and disorganized, with no clear command structure left to hold them together. The humans could sense the fear and desperation in their movements. They weren't just fighting to win now. They were fighting to survive. As the last remaining Zaroth ships tried to regroup, they faced an insurmountable challenge. They had no communications to coordinate their attacks, and their weapons were barely functional. Earth's fleet had effectively turned the Zaroth's greatest strength into their greatest weakness. By targeting their communication hubs and key systems, the humans had rendered the entire Armada blind and weak. Zarak stood on the bridge of the flagship, watching as his once mighty fleet crumbled to pieces. His face was twisted in frustration and disbelief. They had never encountered anything like this before. The humans were using tactics that defied everything the Zaroth had learned from their many conquests. This wasn't just a fight of strength. It was a fight of wits, and the humans had proven they were far more cunning than anyone could have imagined. Meanwhile, aboard the human ships, the crews were working with precision as they closed in on their final target, a small but vital alien vessel, the last command ship that was still somehow operational. The humans knew that this ship was the key to the entire operation. Without it, the remaining Zaroth ships would be like headless chickens, lost and confused, struggling to regain any sense of order. Captain Bennett of the U.S. Vanguard led the charge, her eyes locked onto the display as the final plan was set in motion. She knew this was their only chance to end the conflict once and for all. With a single calculated strike, she directed her ship and the remaining human fleet toward the command vessel, the final enemy ship that held the last thread of hope for the Zaroth commanders. The final strike was swift and brutal. As Earth's ships closed in, they let loose a volley of concentrated fire, targeting the alien ship's weak points, every shot aimed at disabling its remaining systems. In an instant, the ship's shields flickered and then failed, leaving it vulnerable to the next attack. A beam of pure energy struck the command center, and everything went silent for a moment. The communication channels were cut, and the entire fleet was now cut off from its last bastion of control. Zarak stood frozen as his command center went dark. He realized in that moment it was over. The humans had won the battle not through superior firepower, but through their sheer will to adapt and survive. The silence that followed the destruction of the last command vessel was deafening to Zarak and his remaining fleet. It was as though the stars themselves had gone quiet. The realization of defeat settled in like a heavy weight across the entire Zaroth Armada. For the first time in their long history, the mighty alien race was facing extinction at the hands of a species they had once dismissed as weak and insignificant. Zarak looked at the shattered remains of his once unstoppable fleet. The void between the stars was filled with debris and the wreckage of ships that had been torn apart by the unexpected chaos of the human strategy. The asteroid fields had done their damage, But it was the humans' unpredictable brilliance that had turned the tide against them. The Zerath had been caught in a trap not made of weapons or superior tactics, but of human ingenuity. The environment had been turned into their greatest weapon, and now the aliens were paying the price. Zerak's face was pale as he spoke into the communication panel, his voice cracked with desperation. "Initiate retreat." He ordered, his voice low and strained. His pride shattered. The remaining Zerath ships began to move, but it was a feeble attempt. Their engines sputtered, and their shields flickered. They had no real strength left to resist the humans, and they knew it. The humans had already proven that the Zerath's military power meant little against their ability to think on the fly, to turn the battle itself into a weapon. The remaining ships limped away from the battlefield, trying to escape the swarm of human vessels that circled them like vultures, waiting for the inevitable moment when the last of the alien fleet would be snuffed out. The humans weren't done yet. They had already won the day, but they weren't about to let the Zerath slip away, not after all they had done to Earth, not after the lives lost in the initial waves of destruction. Earth's fleet moved in for the kill, the final push to obliterate the last remnants of the Zerath armada. Their ships closed in with relentless precision. The once formidable alien fleet was now a shadow of its former self. With no hope of escape, no chance of recovery, the humans had reduced them to a fractured and defeated force. Zerak turned his gaze toward the stars beyond, knowing that this battle was lost. But the war was over. He had underestimated the humans. They were not the weak and fragile creatures he had assumed them to be. They were a species capable of unimaginable resilience, a species that could face impossible odds and turn them into triumph. And in that moment, Zerak understood the terrible power of humanity's will to survive. The last remnants of the Zerath fleet were now little more than a disorganized band of stragglers drifting aimlessly through the void, their ships moving in irregular patterns as they tried to escape Earth's unrelenting pursuit. The once proud alien armada was broken, their shields shattered, their weapons useless. The humans had successfully torn them apart, not through brute force, but through their sheer adaptability and unyielding willpower. The remaining Zerath ships were like dying creatures struggling to crawl away from the humans. But no matter how fast they moved, no matter how far they tried to flee, the humans were always there, right behind them, relentless as the stars themselves. Zerak stood on the bridge of the flagship, his eyes fixed on the screen. As he watched the shattered fleet break apart before his eyes, a deep sadness filled his chest as he realized the full weight of what had just transpired. This wasn't just a defeat, it was a humbling in the core of his being. He had always been taught that the Zerath were the pinnacle of evolution, that no force in the universe could ever stand against them. Their technology had been unmatched, their tactics flawless. But the humans had proven that even the most powerful empire could be brought down not by might, but by something far more dangerous: their ability to think in ways no one had anticipated. His voice trembled slightly as he gave the order, "Prepare for final retreat." But the words sounded hollow in his ears. The ship's crew had lost all hope. They moved with robotic efficiency, not out of determination, but out of resignation. They were already beaten. They knew it as well as Zerak did. No amount of distance could separate them from the inevitable. Meanwhile, on Earth, the victory was being celebrated, but not in the traditional way. The humans did not revel in the destruction of their enemies. They had come to understand that this was not a battle that could be celebrated with cheers or boastful speeches. Instead, there was a quiet pride in the air. As Earth's fleet moved to finish the job they had been tasked with, they had won. But it was not a victory of conquest. It was a victory of survival. Humanity had faced the most powerful threat they had ever known, and they had come out the other side stronger and more united than ever. Captain Bennett stood on the bridge of the U.S. Vanguard, watching the final moments unfold. She had seen the destruction the Zerath had caused, the lives they had taken, the devastation they had brought to Earth. And yet she couldn't bring herself to take joy in the enemy's retreat. The cost had been too high, and the weight of the battle was still heavy on her heart. She turned to her crew, who had been working tirelessly through the conflict, and gave them a silent nod of approval. Her mind was still processing everything that had happened, the way the humans had turned the tables on the Zerath, how they had used the environment itself to create the perfect trap, how they had adapted at every turn when all seemed lost, and most importantly, how they had managed to work together as one unit in the face of overwhelming odds. The human fleet continued to move through the wreckage of the battlefield, their ships now picking off the remaining alien vessels, one by one as they broke apart in the darkness of space. Earth's forces had accomplished what no one had ever thought possible. They had beaten the Zarath, not through sheer power, but through their unrelenting determination, their ability to think outside the box, their willingness to adapt to any situation, and most of all, their refusal to accept defeat. Zarak watched as his fleet disappeared into the distance, a part of him still hoping that somehow they could escape the humans, that they could find refuge somewhere beyond the reach of Earth's forces. But deep down he knew it was pointless. The humans were relentless. They had already won the war, and nothing could change that. His thoughts were interrupted by a voice on the intercom. "Commander, we've lost contact with the remaining fleet." Zarak turned slowly to face the officer who had spoken. The news was not unexpected, but it hit him like a hammer blow. The remaining ships were scattered, no longer able to fight, and without any guidance they would soon be nothing more than targets for the humans. "Leave them," Zarak said, his voice low and defeated. "It's over." He turned away from the officer and stared out the viewport at the stars ahead of him, his mind racing with the implications of this defeat. The Zarath had spent centuries conquering worlds, and now they were on the verge of losing it all to a species they had dismissed as insignificant creatures with no real hope of survival. But the humans had proven them wrong. They had risen from the ashes of their broken world and fought back with everything they had. They had turned the tables on an enemy that had considered them little more than insects to be crushed beneath their heel. And now the Zarath were the ones on the run. The once great empire was crumbling, and there was nothing Zarak could do to stop it. As the final moments of the battle unfolded, Zarak's thoughts turned inward. He had led the Zarath into battle with the belief that their strength would see them through, but it had been their overconfidence that had led them to this point. Their arrogance had blinded them to the one thing that had made the humans so dangerous, their ability to adapt and think creatively in the face of overwhelming odds. The last Zarath ships drifted into the void one by one as the humans moved to finish their work, and Zarak knew that he had witnessed the end of an era. The Zarath would not be the conquerors of the galaxy anymore. Humanity had taken that mantle, and the universe would never be the same again. Zarak closed his eyes and took a deep breath, the realization settling in that this was not just the end of a battle, it was the end of the Zarath's reign, and the dawn of a new age led by a species that had shown the universe what true survival meant. Humanity had risen from the ashes, and they would not be stopped.